Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So, before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story. The wind howled around the edges of the old Winslow house like a living thing, pressing invisible palms against its warped siding, rattling the rotting shutters. From the road, the house was just another shadow on a hill, its windows empty sockets staring at the valley below. But up close, it looked alive. The porch sagged forward as though it were leaning in to hear secrets, its wooden boards soft with decades of rain and rot. Clara stood at the rusted gate, her fingers curled tightly around the cold iron. She hadn't planned to come here. She hadn't planned to take the winding dirt road at all, but her car's GPS had gone black 20 minutes ago, and she'd been driving without service ever since. Then the storm rolled in, quick and mean, the rain falling in thick, slanting sheets. The house had appeared out of the gray like a conjured thing. Her boots squelched in the mud as she pushed the gate open. It groaned in protest, a sound almost swallowed by the wind. "Just until it passes," she murmured to herself, clutching her coat tighter around her. The storm was growing teeth, lightning flashing in jagged veins across the sky, each one followed by thunder that rolled through her chest. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was. Houses like this didn't need locks. They had reputation for that. She stepped inside and was met by the smell of damp wood, dust, and something else. Faint, metallic. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, glinting off cobweb strands thick enough to look like spun wire. Furniture sat like abandoned sentinels under sheets, their shapes distorted and ghostly. A long hallway stretched ahead, its wallpaper peeled into curling strips that revealed raw plaster beneath. The silence inside was worse than the storm. It wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. She called out a half-hearted, "Hello?" that was instantly devoured by the space. No reply. A noise came from above, a slow, dragging shuffle. Clara froze. She tried to tell herself it was the house settling, but the sound came again, deliberate and uneven, like something being pulled across the floor. Her throat tightened. The beam of her flashlight trembled as she turned toward the staircase. The banister was slick under her hand, the wood worn smooth by years of touch. She began to climb, each step groaning under her weight. Halfway up, she noticed the wallpaper pattern, tiny roses, faded to the color of old blood. The dragging sound stopped. At the top of the stairs, the hallway branched left and right. To the left, the floor disappeared into shadows. To the right, a door stood slightly ajar, pale light leaking from within. She swallowed hard and stepped toward it. The light was dim, the color of candle flame. Pushing the door open, she saw a bedroom frozen in time. Dusty lace curtains, an iron bed frame, a vanity with an oval mirror. A single candle burned on the nightstand, its wax pooled thick and uneven, as though it had been burning for hours. But there was no wind here, no draft, no reason for the flame to flicker. Yet it trembled violently as she entered. Clara's reflection in the mirror looked wrong. Her face was there, pale and wide-eyed, but over her shoulder something stood in the corner. It was tall, its outline thin and jagged, its head tilting slowly, as if curious. The candle went out. The darkness hit like a physical thing, dense, choking, pressing against her skin. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her ears straining for any hint of movement. The room was silent except for the slow, steady thump of her heartbeat. She fumbled for her flashlight, her hands clumsy with panic. The beam flared to life, slicing the shadows. The corner where the figure had been was empty now, just a stack of warped boxes draped in dust-stiffened sheets. Clara let out a shaky laugh, though it didn't sound like her. Just a trick of the light. Just. The mirror shattered. She screamed, stumbling back, her flashlight swinging wildly. Shards glittered on the vanity like scattered ice. But it wasn't the glass that had made her blood run cold. It was what was underneath. Beneath the broken mirror was no wall, no wood, no faded wallpaper. There was a hole, a perfectly round opening, large enough for her to fit through if she crouched, its edges smooth as if carved by something precise. And beyond it, black. Not the soft darkness of an unlit room, but an absence so deep it seemed to swallow the light from her torch. A sound rose from that blackness. It was faint at first, like wind rushing through a distant tunnel, but then it became something else. Whispering. Dozens of voices, overlapping and layered, hissing in a language she couldn't place. Clara's mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to get out, to leave the house, to run until her lungs burned. She turned toward the door and froze. The figure was there. It stood in the doorway, blocking her path, its limbs impossibly long, joints bending in wrong directions. Its face, or where a face should have been, was a pale oval, smooth and empty. Clara's flashlight flickered. The figure took a step forward, its movement accompanied by the faint scrape of nails, or claws, dragging along the floorboards. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She hurled the flashlight at it and bolted for the window. The glass exploded under her weight, slicing into her arms as she tumbled onto the slick porch roof. Rain hit her face in cold sheets. Somewhere behind her, inside the bedroom, the whispering rose to a deafening pitch. She scrambled toward the edge of the roof, intending to drop to the ground and make a run for it. But when she looked down, the yard was gone. The ground had been replaced by the same black void that gaped behind the shattered mirror, stretching endlessly in all directions. The fence, the trees, even the road, all gone. Only the house remained. Clara's breath came in short, ragged bursts. The rain didn't seem to fall into the void. It simply vanished the moment it crossed the edge of the roof, like it was being swallowed whole. She stepped back, her boots sliding dangerously on the slick shingles. Behind her, the window frame gaped open, shards of glass trembling in the wind. The whispering was still there, louder now, the voices tumbling over each other in frantic urgency. She couldn't understand the words, but she felt them, like cold fingers trailing along her spine. Her only option was back inside. Clara crawled to the window, peering into the bedroom. The candle on the nightstand was lit again, its flame unnaturally still. The figure was gone. She swung her legs over and dropped onto the floor, wincing as her boots crunched on shards of broken mirror. The hole in the wall was still there, impossibly black, drawing her gaze like a magnet. Something in her gut told her it wasn't just darkness. It was looking back. She needed to leave the room. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through cracked windows. The air here was heavier, thick with the scent of damp plaster, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. She moved quietly, her steps muffled by the threadbare carpet runner. Halfway down the hall, she heard it again, the dragging sound, only now it was above her. She stopped, heart hammering. Slowly, her eyes lifted to the ceiling. The plaster bulged slightly, as if something was pressing down from the other side. A faint line appeared, stretching across the ceiling, widening into a crack. Something wet dripped onto her cheek. Clara flinched, wiping at her face, and her fingers came away smeared with dark red. The bulge in the ceiling shifted, and for a moment, she saw the outline of a hand pressing against the plaster from inside, its fingers unnaturally long. Then the ceiling sagged further, groaning under the strain. She ran. The staircase loomed ahead, but as she reached it, her stomach dropped. The stairs no longer led to the front door. Instead, they descended into that same black void, step after step, disappearing into nothing. Behind her, the ceiling split open. A pale arm slid through, bending at strange angles, its hand clawing at the air. Another arm followed, and then a head, featureless, smooth, tilting toward her with slow deliberation. The voices swelled until they were almost a scream. Clara backed away, her heels teetering at the top of the stairs, the void yawning below. The thing dropped from the ceiling with a sickening, boneless lurch, landing silently on the carpet between her and the rest of the hall. Its head cocked. Then it took a step toward her. Clara's legs trembled as she pressed herself back against the stair railing. The figure's movements were deliberate, almost curious, but its silence was worse than any growl or scream could have been. The way it tilted its head, as if studying her, made her feel like prey that had already been caught. Her eyes darted around for a weapon, anything to put distance between herself and that smooth, faceless thing. The closest object was an old, rusted candle holder on a small table by the wall. She lunged for it, snatching it up just as the figure closed the space between them. The moment she swung, it moved. Not backward, not to the side, just away. One instant it was in front of her, the next it was standing halfway down the hall, the exact same posture, the exact same tilt of its head. Her skin crawled. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. It didn't answer. The voices did. From somewhere deep in the house, the whispers surged forward like a wave. They layered over each other, growing louder until they became a single, united tone, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in her bones. Her teeth ached from it. The figure took another step forward. Clara's instinct screamed for escape. She turned and ran down the stairs, not caring that the steps vanished into the void. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe the ground was still there. It wasn't. She skidded to a halt on the last visible step, her toes hovering over emptiness. The blackness churned below, not like smoke, but like liquid, thick and swallowing every trace of light. Behind her, something creaked. Slowly, she turned her head. The figure stood at the top of the stairs now. It wasn't walking. It was simply appearing, always closer than before. Its head angled down at her, as though it were considering whether to follow. A sudden noise made her flinch, a door slamming somewhere deep inside the house. Then another, and another. One by one, the rooms above her seemed to be sealing themselves shut, the echoes overlapping into a pounding rhythm that matched the frantic beat of her heart. When she looked back, the figure was gone. She clung to the railing, scanning every corner of the dim, warped foyer. The shadows seemed to twitch and breathe. The air was growing warmer, heavier, almost damp, and the sweet, rotting smell was stronger now. A voice, just one, clear and close, spoke behind her ear. "Come down." She spun around, but there was only the void, and as she stared, she saw movement deep within it. Something vast shifting just beyond the reach of the stairs, circling slowly, waiting. The shape beneath the surface of the void was massive, its form impossible to fully make out, like a shadow moving in deeper shadow. Every time it shifted, the black liquid rippled outward in slow, deliberate waves, as if it had all the time in the world. Clara's grip on the railing tightened until her knuckles ached. She stepped back up one stair, then another, keeping her eyes locked on the churning dark. The thing below mirrored her, its movement following her steps exactly, circling just under the surface. A low vibration rose from the void, not sound exactly, but a pressure, pushing into her ears and skull. It was accompanied by a faint rhythmic thump. It took her a moment to realize it was matching her heartbeat. She wanted to scream. Instead, she climbed another step, and that's when she saw it. Fingers, pale and impossibly long, emerging from the black liquid without breaking its surface, as if passing through a layer of smoke. The hand flexed slowly, each motion deliberate, before curling and retreating beneath again. Her mind screamed to run, but her body stayed rooted. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards groaned under a weight that moved slowly but purposefully. She could hear it, the same dragging sound from before, making its way toward the stairs. Clara forced herself to look away from the void and up toward the landing. Shadows bent oddly there, pooling in the corners, stretching toward her. The air grew colder with every heartbeat, and the pressure in her ears deepened. Then, movement. The figure appeared at the top of the stairs again, no longer tilting its head, no longer still. Its limbs twitched in short, unnatural bursts, like a puppet jerked by too many strings. It began descending, not walking, but gliding, each foot hovering inches above the steps. The house itself seemed to react. The walls groaned. The ceiling above her shuddered as if something massive shifted in the attic. The candlelight from the bedroom upstairs flickered down the hall and then snuffed out, leaving only the dim gray light of the storm through broken windows. The figure's featureless head turned slightly, not toward her, but toward the void. In response, the black surface swelled upward, forming a low, cresting wave that lapped just below the final stair. Something was rising. Clara's body finally obeyed. She bolted sideways, stumbling into the hallway off the landing, searching for any door that wasn't slammed shut. Most were sealed tight, their frames warped and splintered, as though something had driven them closed with inhuman force. One door at the very end hung slightly ajar. She didn't hesitate. She ran for it. Clara shoved the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. The room smelled different from the rest of the house, less like rot and damp, more like dust and something faintly medicinal, like an old hospital ward. Her eyes darted around in the dim light. It was a study, or at least it had been once. Books lined the walls, their spines cracked and faded. A heavy desk sat beneath a tall window, its surface littered with yellowed papers and a typewriter that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The storm outside clawed at the glass, lightning flashing in quick, violent bursts. For a moment, she could almost pretend she was safe here, tucked away from whatever was moving through the halls. Almost. A deep creak echoed from just beyond the door, the sound of weight shifting on old wood. The dragging noise followed, slow, unhurried, the rhythm steady as a clock. Clara's eyes scanned the room for another way out. Behind the desk, the floor dipped slightly, and she noticed a rectangular seam in the wood. A trap door. She hurried to it, dropping to her knees and prying at the edges. The wood groaned under her hands, but it didn't budge, until she noticed the brass latch hidden beneath a stack of papers. She flipped it open, and the hatch gave way with a reluctant sigh, releasing a puff of cold, stale air. The sound in the hall stopped. Clara froze, one hand on the trap door, the other braced against the floor. She could hear her own breathing, the faint patter of rain against the window, and nothing else. The silence was worse than the dragging. Then came a slow knock on the door. 3 measured taps. She swallowed hard, glancing between the trap door and the door to the hallway. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The knock came again, this time louder, followed by a faint scrape, like nails dragging down the wood. She lifted the trap door and peered inside. A steep wooden ladder led down into darkness. She could smell earth, damp and cold, and hear a faint dripping somewhere below. The door latch rattled. Clara lowered herself into the opening, gripping the sides of the ladder. The air down here was heavier, tasting of soil and rust. She pulled the hatch shut above her, plunging herself into near-total darkness. Her hands fumbled for her flashlight, and when she clicked it on, the beam illuminated narrow dirt walls pressing in on either side. She began to climb down, each rung creaking beneath her weight. About halfway down, she realized the dripping sound wasn't water. It was something breathing. Slow, wet, close. The flashlight trembled in Clara's hand as she froze mid-step on the ladder. The breathing was so close now she could feel it, a damp exhale brushing the side of her face, hot against the cold earth. She swung the light downward. The beam landed on nothing but packed dirt for a moment. Then something moved in the shadow. A pale shape slid back into the darkness, too smooth, too quick. The sound of breathing shifted, now coming from behind her. Her head whipped upward. Just a few feet above where the trapdoor should have been, there was only packed earth, solid, seamless, as though the hatch had never existed. Panic ripped through her. She turned back down, forcing her legs to move faster. The ladder rungs were slick now, coated in something she didn't want to identify. The tunnel opened into a narrow chamber, carved directly into the earth. The air was thick, almost liquid in her lungs, and the walls glistened faintly in the beam of her light. That's when she saw them. Dozens of figures lined the chamber walls, half buried in dirt up to their chests. Their skin was pale and stretched, their heads drooping forward as if in sleep. Some had strands of hair hanging in lank, filthy clumps. Others had no hair at all. Clara's voice caught in her throat. "Oh my God!" One of them twitched. Its head lifted slowly and she saw its face, or the absence of one. Smooth, blank skin where features should be. The movement spread along the walls, one by one, heads lifting, bodies shifting against the earth. Their mouths, featureless until now, began to tear open, thin slits widening into gaping holes. The whispering began again. This time she understood pieces of it. "Join us." Her flashlight flickered violently. In the brief strobe of light and dark, she thought she saw the black void, not beneath her feet this time, but seeping like water from the earthen walls, crawling toward her in slow tendrils. She stumbled backward, her boot catching on something. She looked down. A typewriter sat on the dirt floor, half buried, its keys rusted and clogged with mud. But fresh paper sat in the carriage. Words were typed in uneven, jagged lines. "There is no door. There is only down." A long, wet sigh exhaled behind her. Clara turned, and the figure from the house was there, its long limbs folding in on themselves as it crouched low to fit inside the tunnel. Its head tilted, just like before. But now it was smiling. The smile wasn't human. It split the smooth oval of its face without tearing, as if the skin itself had simply decided to open. Inside there were no teeth. Just darkness, impossibly deep, pulling at her eyes like the void outside the house. Clara stumbled back until her shoulders hit the damp, earthen wall. The faceless figures embedded in the dirt leaned forward in unison, their whispering voices merging into a low, droning chant. The air thickened, pressing into her ears until her own breath sounded muffled. The figure stepped closer, its limbs unfolding like an insect's. With each movement, the walls seemed to tremble, clumps of soil dropping to the floor. The black tendrils seeping from the dirt quickened their crawl, inching toward her boots. Her fight or flight response screamed run, but there was nowhere to go. The tunnel behind the creature was too narrow to slip past without touching it, and something deep in her gut told her that touching it meant she'd never come back. Her flashlight beam caught on something behind the figure, a gap in the dirt wall. It was small, jagged, but just wide enough for her to squeeze through. She had no idea where it led, but she didn't have the luxury of choice. She waited until the figure took another step forward, its head tilting slightly to one side, as though savoring the moment. Then she lunged for the gap. The chanting rose in pitch, the embedded figures thrashing against the earth, their mouths yawning wide. The figure moved faster than she thought possible. It was on her in an instant, one claw-like hand grazing her coat sleeve as she dove into the opening. The soil tore at her clothes and scraped her skin as she forced herself through the narrow space. She didn't stop, even as the whispers followed her, curling into her ears like smoke. She could feel the tendrils now, brushing her ankles, trying to catch hold. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder with every foot. Somewhere ahead she heard water, not dripping, but rushing. The sound was almost a relief until she realized it was growing deafeningly loud. Her flashlight beam broke into open space. She tumbled out of the tunnel and landed hard on wet stone. She'd emerged into a massive cavern, the ceiling lost in darkness. In the center was an underground river, its black water churning violently, and there, half submerged, was the Winslow house. It stood at a crooked angle in the rushing current, its porch half collapsed, windows glowing faintly from within. Somehow it had followed her. The sight was impossible, yet there it was. The Winslow house, its warped siding dripping with river water, as if it had been here for centuries. The glow from its windows pulsed faintly, like the slow beat of a heart. Clara staggered to her feet, her hands scraping against the slick stone. The underground river roared, spraying cold mist that clung to her skin. She tried to convince herself it was just her mind fraying, that she was seeing shapes where there were none. But the porch light blinked, once, twice, as if in greeting. A hollow thump echoed from within the house, then another. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, footsteps moving from one end to the other. Clara took a step toward the riverbank before she realized the water between her and the house was wrong. It didn't move like water. It churned too thickly, its surface stretching and folding as though alive. Now and then, pale shapes appeared just beneath it, long limbs unfurling before vanishing again. Something brushed her boot. She jerked back, heart hammering, just in time to see a pale hand retreat into the black current. It had too many fingers. Across the water, the house door swung open. From the threshold, the figure emerged, its head still tilted in that inhuman way. Even from this distance, she could feel its focus like cold breath on the back of her neck. Behind her, movement scraped in the tunnel she'd crawled through, dozens of shapes spilling from the darkness. The embedded figures had freed themselves. Their bodies moved wrong, joints bending at grotesque angles, heads twitching in erratic jerks. The river surged, spraying arcs of black water onto the cavern floor. The current between her and the house swelled upward, forming a bridge. No, not a bridge. A spine, pale and slick, rising from the depths, vertebrae clicking into place one by one until it arched across the river. The figure on the porch began to cross. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She glanced back at the swarm closing in behind her, their whispering now a harsh, urgent hiss. Down, down, down. Her only options were the thing coming toward her across the spine or the faceless one spilling into the cavern. She ran, straight for the far side of the cavern, away from both. The slick rock sloped upward toward what looked like another passage. Her boots slipped, her palms scraping raw against the stone, but she didn't stop. From the corner of her eye, she saw the figure pause mid-crossing, its head turning slowly to follow her. Then it began to run. Clara's lungs burned as she pushed herself up the slick incline, each step threatening to send her sliding back toward the river. The sound of the figure's pursuit was unlike footsteps, more like a rapid skitter, claws clacking against bone. The vertebrae bridge rattled under its weight. The passage ahead narrowed into a jagged opening in the rock, just tall enough for her to duck through. She didn't think. She dove inside, skin tearing on sharp edges. The darkness beyond swallowed her whole. She pressed her back to the damp wall, forcing her breathing to slow. The air in this tunnel was colder, the smell of earth sharper here, like a grave recently disturbed. Behind her, the skittering slowed. She could hear the figures breathing now, steady, measured, in no rush at all. A faint sound came from deeper in the tunnel. Not whispers this time, but a steady rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against stone. It was coming closer, trapped between two things. Her flashlight beam wavered as she turned toward the deeper sound. The light caught on something embedded in the wall, a face. Pale, half covered in soil, its mouth open in a silent scream. Then the eyes rolled toward her. The tapping stopped. From the other direction, the figure's claws scraped once, twice against the tunnel wall. It was waiting. Clara backed away from the face in the wall, her shoulder brushing another, and another. The tunnel was lined with them, faces, some fresh, some little more than skulls, all angled toward her now. Her chest tightened, the walls feeling closer with every breath. Somewhere ahead, the tapping resumed, louder now. It became a drumming, as if dozens of hands were beating against the stone. Dust rained from the ceiling, coating her tongue with a bitter grit. The faces began to move. Not out of the wall, but within it, the soil shifting around them, their mouths opening wider, dark earth spilling from between their teeth. A sharp crack split the air. Behind her, the figure's voice finally came, not in a whisper, but a low, resonant murmur that filled the tunnel. Down. The floor beneath her shifted. Before she could react, the rock gave way entirely, sending her plunging into a vertical shaft. The light from her flashlight spun wildly, flashing over dirt, stone, and the fleeting impression of other shapes falling with her. The fall didn't end in impact. It ended in water, thick, black, and silent. The water closed over Clara like a living thing, cold searing through her skin as if it were pulling the heat straight from her bones. She kicked upward instinctively, but her limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as though the liquid clung to her in ropes. Her flashlight was gone, its beam lost somewhere in the swirling dark. She opened her eyes, expecting the sting of water, but instead found herself staring into an endless black that didn't cloud or blur. There was simply nothing. Then movement. Shapes drifted around her, pale and limbless at first glance, until she realized they were torsos, slowly rotating in the current. Their faces, or where faces should be, were smooth, but faint impressions pressed outward from beneath the skin, as though something inside was trying to force its way out. Her lungs burned. Panic clawed at her chest. She forced her arms upward, desperate to break the surface. Her hand touched something solid. It wasn't air. The surface was smooth and unyielding, stretching endlessly in all directions, as though she were trapped beneath a sheet of black glass. Her scream came out as a muffled rush of bubbles. Something brushed her ankle, then it wrapped around it. She looked down, or what she thought was down, and saw a pale arm rising from the dark below, the joints too many, bending wrong. Its fingers were long enough to curl twice around her leg. Another arm followed, and then the figure began to emerge, its head tilting, smile splitting wider than before. She kicked wildly, trying to wrench herself free, but the grip was unbreakable. The other shapes in the water stirred, drifting closer. Some had mouths now, opening in silent cries. The figure pulled her downward. The false surface above her grew dimmer, fading until it was gone entirely. Her ears popped as the pressure deepened, and a sound began to hum through the water, low, deep, and steady, like the slow turning of a colossal engine. Ahead, a faint light appeared. Not white, but a sickly amber, glowing from somewhere far below. The figure's grip tightened, dragging her toward it. The light grew, revealing a vast structure in the deep. Wooden walls, warped and rotted, windows glowing with the same amber pulse. It was the Winslow house again, impossibly preserved, anchored on the ocean floor. And at the open front door, dozens of other faceless figures waited, motionless, their heads all tilting in the same direction. Toward her. The pressure in Clara's chest was unbearable now, every instinct screaming for air. She clawed at the figure's arm, nails raking over skin that felt slick and cold, but it didn't loosen its grip. The amber glow from the house swelled, swallowing the darkness until every warped board and broken shingle was visible through the water. The figures at the doorway stood in perfect formation, their smooth faces reflecting the dim light. None of them moved, until the one in the center stepped forward. Its movements were slow, deliberate. As it reached the edge of the porch, the others parted, creating a narrow path straight through the doorway. Beyond, Clara could see nothing but black, a darkness deeper than the water around her. The figure dragging her downward angled its head toward the door, as though seeking permission. The one on the porch gave the smallest of nods. They began to descend faster. Clara's lungs convulsed, a searing pain blooming through her ribs. Her vision tunneled at the edges, and she knew if she didn't breathe soon, she would inhale this thing around her. The house loomed above her now, its roofline distorted by the shifting currents. The front steps were warped, sinking slightly into the silt, and as they landed, a cloud of black sand swirled upward, clinging to her clothes and skin. The figure released her ankle, only to take her by the wrist instead, pulling her toward the open door. Every part of her screamed, "Don't go inside." But when she glanced upward, the water above was gone, replaced by the same endless black void she'd seen before. There was no way back. As they crossed the threshold, the water vanished. Clara stumbled forward, gasping, dragging in air so cold it burned her throat. Her clothes were dry now, though the chill had seeped deep into her bones. The door closed behind her. The interior of the Winslow house was wrong, different from what she'd seen upstairs before. The walls were narrower, the ceiling lower, the floorboards dark and damp. There were no stairs here, no hallway, just a single corridor stretching forward, lined with closed doors on either side. The figure let go of her wrist and gestured down the hallway with one long, pale hand. Somewhere ahead, a faint tapping began, slow and steady. With each tap, the doors along the corridor shuddered slightly, as if something inside was testing the hinges. The tapping quickened. The doors began to open. One by one, the doors creaked open, spilling pale light into the hallway. The air grew heavier, dense with that same sweet rot she'd smelled upstairs in the house above. Clara's feet felt rooted, as though the warped boards beneath her were clinging to her boots. From the first open doorway, a figure stepped out, its head tilted too far to one side, neck bending with a wet crack. Another emerged from the second door, moving in that jerky, puppet-like way, its limbs shuddering with each step. By the fifth door, there were too many to count. They filled the hallway on either side, lining it like silent sentinels, their blank faces turned toward her. The tapping stopped. Silence pressed in. Then, all at once, their mouths tore open, not with screams, but with a sound like rushing wind. It poured from them in unison, whipping through the hall until the flickering light dimmed, drawn toward that impossible darkness, yawning deeper inside. The figure who had dragged her here stepped forward, its long fingers brushing her shoulder. It didn't grip her, just pushed gently but insistently, urging her to walk. She shook her head. "No, I'm not going any further." Her voice sounded too small in the vast silence. The wind sound from the open mouths grew louder, building into a howl that rattled the warped boards. The figures began to close in, their movements still jerky but faster now, closing the space around her in slow, deliberate steps. The pale hand pushed her again, harder this time. Clara stumbled forward, her eyes fixed on the far end of the corridor, where the light stopped entirely. The darkness there didn't look like shadow. It looked solid, like a wall made of black stone. The closer she got, the more the air vibrated, the sound digging into her teeth, making her jaw ache. Her vision wavered, edges blurring, and shapes began to form in the wall of black ahead, twisted silhouettes bending and turning in slow, unnatural ways. She reached the end of the hallway, and the figure's hand slid from her shoulder to the middle of her back, pressing her toward the wall. The black wasn't solid after all. It rippled at her touch, cool and slick like oil. When she tried to pull away, the faceless ones surged forward in perfect unison, their mouths stretching wider, the howling now almost unbearable. And then, without warning, the figure shoved her through. Cold swallowed her instantly, a depthless cold that felt less like temperature and more like absence. For a moment, there was no sense of falling or standing, just suspension in something that shifted and breathed around her. Shapes moved in the dark. Not close, not yet, but circling. Each time one passed near, she felt it. Not physically, but in her thoughts, like someone brushing the edges of her mind with wet fingers. Images flashed without her consent. The Winslow house perched alone on a hill, lightning clawing at the sky, a black river curling beneath it like a coiled snake. The cold deepened. A faint light appeared ahead, swaying as though seen through water. Clara stepped toward it, though her feet didn't quite touch anything. Every motion felt delayed, as if her body and her mind were slightly out of sync. As she drew closer, the light resolved into the flame of a single candle, resting on a warped nightstand in a room she recognized. The bedroom. The first one she'd entered upstairs, with the lace curtains and the shattered mirror. Except here, the mirror wasn't broken. It was whole, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Her own reflection stood in it, only it wasn't moving the same way she was. When she tilted her head, the reflection tilted the other way. When she stepped closer, it stepped back. Its eyes, her eyes, were wide and unblinking, fixed on something behind her. Slowly, against every screaming instinct, Clara turned. The figure was there, as she knew it would be, but now its head wasn't tilted. It was perfectly straight, its smooth face inches from hers. The smile was gone. It raised one long arm and placed its palm gently against her chest. She felt nothing through her clothes, no heat, no pressure. But her heart stumbled in its rhythm, skipping beats. From the mirror, her reflection smiled. The candle's flame snapped out. Darkness again, but not silent this time. The whispering returned, closer than ever, right against her ear. It wasn't layered now, it was a single voice, calm and almost kind. "There is no leaving." Something pulled at her from behind, and before she could resist, she was yanked backward into the mirror. The sensation was like falling through ice, solid one instant, shattering and swallowing her the next. Clara's lungs seized as she tumbled backward into a suffocating cold that burned, her limbs thrashing in empty space. When the darkness thinned, she found herself standing in another version of the bedroom, though this one was wrong in ways her mind struggled to catalog. The ceiling arched, too high, lost in shadow. The walls were stretched as if pulled upward, their wallpaper sagging like wet skin. The furniture, though familiar, was swollen and warped, edges curling inward, and every surface pulsed, slow, steady, as if the room itself were breathing. The mirror she'd been pulled through was gone. In its place was a black doorway, irregular and shifting, its edges twitching like the mouth of some waiting thing. A faint rhythmic thud echoed from within, too slow to be a heartbeat, too deep to be anything human. Her first instinct was to back away, but the floor moved with her, literally shifting, boards stretching and contracting in the same slow rhythm as the walls. A voice came from somewhere behind her. Not the figures, not the layered whispers. This voice was smaller, human. "Don't turn around." Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was female, soft but urgent, trembling at the edges. The air shifted slightly against the back of her neck, as if someone was standing inches away. "They can't see you if you don't move," the voice whispered. "Not yet." Her legs wanted to bolt, but her chest tightened with the awful realization that moving might be exactly whatever they were wanted. A faint sound, wet and deliberate, dripped from the far corner of the room. The breathing walls seemed to press inward slightly. The voice behind her came again, thinner now, like the speaker was struggling to keep hold of the words. "Don't go through the door. If you do, you'll never." The sentence cut off in a sharp, wet gasp, like someone pulled violently backward. Something brushed Clara's hair. The floor stopped breathing. The silence was immediate, heavy enough to make Clara's ears ring. She didn't dare turn around, but every instinct screamed that whatever had brushed her hair was still there, closer now, leaning in, waiting for her to move. Her pulse pounded in her throat, loud in the oppressive stillness. From the far corner of the room came a new sound, a slow scrape, like nails dragging across the warped floorboards. Then another. It was deliberate, measured, and growing nearer. The black doorway ahead of her shifted, its edges rippling faster, as though responding to the sound. Within its depths, the darkness thickened, and for a split second she thought she saw shapes moving, tall, thin, bending wrong in the cramped space. The scraping paused. The thing behind her exhaled, warm and damp against her neck. The smell was faintly sweet, rotting fruit mixed with rust. Clara's knees trembled. She could feel the choice pressing against her chest, face whatever was at her back, or run toward the writhing darkness ahead. Her decision was made for her. The breathing figure behind her stepped forward, its presence looming until the air seemed to compress around her. Something cold and smooth slid over her wrist. Fingers, impossibly long, curling gently but firmly. They pulled. She stumbled forward toward the black doorway, her protests trapped in her throat. The rippling edges flared outward, like fabric caught in wind, and a low hum began to vibrate through the room. She dug her heels into the warped boards, trying to resist, but the grip on her wrist was unbreakable. The closer she got, the more she felt the air around the doorway change, dense and damp as if she were approaching the depths of a cave. Just as her toes reached the threshold, the walls around her convulsed, every surface bulging outward in a sudden, violent shudder. A chorus of whispers erupted all at once, so loud they became a roar, and from the black doorway something surged forward, white skeletal hands, dozens of them, clawing through the opening and reaching for her. The thing holding her wrist shoved her in. Cold swallowed her again, but this time it wasn't still. It rushed, dragging her downward at impossible speed. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard screaming, not hers, but hundreds of voices, all crying out at once. And then she landed hard on wet ground. She was outside, except the sky above was wrong. Gray and swirling, clouds bending in spirals toward a single massive shape that hung impossibly low in the air. The shape in the sky was alive. Clara knew it before her mind could form the thought. It wasn't a cloud at all, but something vast and coiled, its surface shifting like muscle beneath translucent skin. The spirals in the clouds weren't weather. They were the slow rotation of its immense body. It had no visible face, no eyes, yet she felt its attention sweep across the soaked ground, settling on her. The air grew heavier under its gaze, pressing her shoulders down until her knees buckled. She forced herself to look away, scanning the landscape. It wasn't the hill where the Winslow house had stood. There were no roads, no trees, just a barren stretch of blackened earth, pitted with deep, water-filled holes. In the distance, warped buildings jutted from the ground at odd angles, half sunken like the remnants of a drowned city. Some still had faint, flickering lights in their windows. Closer, she saw figures moving, dozens of them. They walked in slow, staggered paths, as if tethered to something she couldn't see. Their heads hung low, arms dangling. The ones nearest her turned slightly, and she saw the same blank faces she'd seen in the house, featureless until the moment they noticed her. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, mouths tore open, stretching impossibly wide. They began to move toward her. Clara stumbled backward, boots sinking into the mud. The ground beneath her shifted like something alive, and she felt the faintest give, like skin stretched over muscle. She didn't dare stay still long enough to confirm it. Lightning flickered in the swirling sky, illuminating the massive shape overhead. This time she caught a glimpse of something moving beneath its translucent surface. Silhouettes of writhing, human-sized shapes trapped inside. Some of them pounded against the inner membrane, their movements frantic and jerky. A deep, resonant hum rolled through the air, vibrating in her teeth. The figures advancing toward her stopped all at once, their heads tilting upward to the sky. In unison, they dropped to their knees, pressing their hands into the ground. The hum deepened. The earth split open in a jagged line between her and the kneeling figures, revealing not dirt, but the same black liquid she'd seen in the void. Something began to rise from it. She didn't wait to see what. She turned and ran toward the distant half-sunken buildings, the ground shifting sickeningly under each step. The hum followed her, growing louder, almost eager. Somewhere behind her, the rising thing let out its first sound, a wet, shuddering breath that smelled of rust and rot, carrying her name in the whisper. Clara, hearing her name in that voice, froze her mid-stride. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the churning air as if whispered directly into her ear. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The thing rising from the split in the earth was neither entirely human, nor entirely something else. Its body was pale and jointless, its limbs tapering into long, root-like tendrils that trailed back into the black liquid below. Its head, or what passed for one, was smooth, featureless, until it shifted. Then a face formed on its surface, pressed outward from within, like something trying to force its way through a thin sheet of flesh. It was her own face. The mouth moved in perfect sync with her breath, shaping her name again. Clara. She stumbled backward, nearly falling as the ground rippled beneath her like a disturbed drumhead. The massive shape in the sky pulsed in slow approval, its vast coils turning ever so slightly. The kneeling, faceless ones began to rock back and forth, their hands digging deeper into the earth, their whispering joining into a low chant. She turned and sprinted toward the sunken buildings, her legs heavy as though she were running through water. The closer she got, the more she saw. Doors yawning open into darkness, windows shattered, signs hanging from rusted chains that creaked in the wind. The first building she reached was a tilted two-story structure, half swallowed by the ground. The sign above its door swung in the stormlight. Mercantile in faded paint. She ducked inside, the air instantly colder, the sound of the hum dampened but not gone. The interior was gutted. Shelves collapsed into heaps, floorboards warped and split. Water pooled in the corners, reflecting the sick spiral of the sky through the broken windows. Somewhere deeper in the building, floorboards creaked. Clara froze. "Hello?" she whispered, though she hated herself for saying it. A shadow shifted in the far corner, where the light didn't reach. Something stepped forward, small, slight, its movements more human than anything she'd seen since arriving here. It was a girl. She couldn't have been older than 12, her hair hanging in wet strands over her face. She wore a plain white dress, the hem shredded and stained with dark streaks. She raised her head slowly and Clara's heart lurched. The girl had a face, but it wasn't right. Her features twitched constantly, shifting between expressions, fear, rage, grief, like someone was cycling through masks too fast for them to settle. Her voice, when it came, was not her own, but many, layered and overlapping. "You shouldn't have come here." The floor shook beneath them. Dust sifted down from the sagging ceiling as the floorboards groaned under a deep, rolling tremor. Clara staggered back a step, her hand shooting out to grip the frame of a collapsed shelf. The girl didn't move. She stood perfectly still in the dim light, her shifting expressions slowing until her face settled into something unreadable. "They know you now," the girl said, this time in a single voice, small and flat. "You can't hide anymore." A wet, dragging sound slithered through the air outside, just beyond the broken windows. Clara's gaze flicked to the street. The kneeling figures had risen, their faceless heads all turned toward the mercantile. They didn't move closer, yet, but their bodies swayed in perfect unison, as though some unseen current passed through them. The girl tilted her head slightly, a motion disturbingly similar to the figure that had stalked Clara since the house. "They'll wait," she murmured. "They always wait." Clara swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The girl stepped forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the warped boards. "Someone who stayed too long." Her words landed like stones in Clara's chest. She took a step back, but the girl's eyes, if they even were eyes, seemed to pin her in place. "You can still run," the girl said, "but the doors will change." Before Clara could ask what that meant, the dragging sound outside grew louder. The building's shadows deepened unnaturally, pooling in corners and stretching across the floor. The girl turned her head toward the noise, her shifting features flashing a brief look of terror before flattening again. "They're calling it closer," she whispered. "It wants to see you." The floorboards to Clara's right split open with a sharp crack. Black liquid bubbled up between them, the smell of rot and metal filling the air. From the bubbling dark, fingers began to emerge, long, white, and jointless, curling around the edges of the floor as if testing the wood's strength. The girl stepped back into the shadows, her form fading until only her face remained visible. "Don't look at its eyes," she said. The boards gave way. The floor collapsed inward, spilling splintered wood into the black liquid below. Clara stumbled back, catching herself against the wall, just as something began to rise from the breach. It wasn't climbing, it was unfolding. Pale limbs uncoiled like ropes, joints bending wrong, twisting until they locked into place. The surface of its head was smooth at first, but then the skin rippled and two deep hollows pushed outward where eyes should be. Against every instinct, Clara's gaze flicked upward. And she saw them. The eyes weren't eyes at all, but tunnels, dark and endless, pulling her vision inward. A pressure gripped the sides of her head, tightening until she felt she might split apart. Images flooded her mind. Rooms she'd never been in, corridors twisting in impossible directions, the Winslow house stretching upward into the sky like a tower that pierced the clouds. Somewhere in the vision, she saw herself walking those halls, unaware of something just behind her. A hand slapped across her face, breaking the pull. Clara gasped, stumbling backward to see the girl standing in front of her, eyes wide and fixed on the creature. "I told you not to look." The pale limbs shot forward, smashing through the shelves with a force that shook the building. Clara ducked low, grabbing the girl's wrist. Together they bolted for the back of the mercantile, the floor trembling with every movement of the thing behind them. They burst through a half-collapsed doorway into a narrow alley between buildings. The air here was thicker, the hum from the sky thing overhead pressing into their chests like weight. The ground was softer, too, sucking at their boots with every step. The girl didn't slow. "We have to get below," she said, her voice shaking now. "Below what?" Clara asked, but the girl didn't answer. They rounded a corner and Clara froze. Ahead, the alley ended abruptly in a wall of black liquid, perfectly still like glass. It reflected the warped buildings and the spiraling sky, but not them. The girl stepped right up to it, pressing her palm against the surface. "It can't follow if we're under." Before Clara could ask what under meant, the liquid rippled outward from the girl's touch. Without hesitation, the girl stepped through and vanished. The sound of splintering wood erupted behind her. The pale limbs were in the alley now. Clara didn't think. She dove into the black. Cold slammed into her chest like a wall. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she was falling or sinking. The blackness around her was too thick, swallowing every trace of light. Then, faintly, a glow appeared below. Not bright, but warm, like candlelight filtered through water. She kicked toward it, her movements sluggish as though the liquid clung to her in invisible threads. The glow grew, resolving into dozens, no, hundreds, of lanterns suspended in the dark. They swayed gently, but there was no wind here. Each one illuminated a small circle of ground beneath it, revealing narrow paths and stone archways that seemed to stretch forever. She broke the surface. Not of water, but of air that smelled faintly of salt and something metallic. Her boots splashed down onto wet cobblestones, and for the first time since she'd left the real world, the ground felt solid. The girl was standing a few paces ahead, her white dress dripping but her breathing steady. She didn't turn around. Clara took a step forward. "Where are we?" The girl's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The between." The words seemed to settle heavily in the air. Lantern light danced over the walls of the narrow street they stood in, though Clara couldn't see where the light was coming from. No hooks, no posts, just the lanterns themselves, hanging in the dark. The buildings here were different from the ruins above. They were intact, their windows shuttered, their doors bolted. And yet, she felt eyes behind every one of them. "Why bring me here?" Clara asked. The girl finally looked at her, and her face was calmer now, though her eyes still twitched faintly, like something beneath the skin was restless. "Because above it hunts. Here it waits. There's a difference." Before Clara could ask what it was, a sound echoed through the narrow street, a slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. The girl's expression changed. "We need to move." They began walking quickly, their boots splashing through shallow puddles. The knocking came again, this time from somewhere closer, followed by the faint creak of a door opening. Clara glanced over her shoulder and froze. One of the lanterns had gone out. The darkness it left behind wasn't empty. It was moving. The darkness seeped along the cobblestones like spilled ink, curling around corners, swallowing the pale reflections of the remaining lanterns. Clara's chest tightened. It didn't move like smoke or liquid. It reached, stretching tendrils that brushed walls and door frames, leaving them slick and black. The girl grabbed her wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for her size. "Don't let it touch you." They ran. The lanterns ahead swayed harder now, casting erratic shadows that darted and twisted across the narrow street. Each time one went out, the darkness surged forward in a quick, hungry lurch. The knocking came again, louder, sharper, echoing through the walls around them. Clara couldn't tell if it was in front of them, behind them, or both. The girl turned sharply into an even narrower passage, the space so tight Clara's shoulders brushed damp stone on either side. The lanterns here hung lower, some swinging wildly as if disturbed by an unseen hand. "Where does this go?" Clara panted. "A door," the girl said, not slowing. "Not the same as theirs. Ours leads away." The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Clara's ears strained for any sound, and at first she heard only their footsteps, until the faint scrape of something sliding against stone joined them. It was coming from above. She looked up. The narrow gap of sky between the walls was gone, replaced by a black, shifting surface that moved with deliberate weight, pressing downward. Within it, she thought she saw pale shapes moving, long, thin fingers dragging across the stone. The girl yanked her forward. "Don't look." They burst into a small courtyard surrounded by shuttered buildings. In the center stood an old wooden door frame with no walls, no roof, just the frame, freestanding and impossibly intact. Its wood was blackened with age, but the brass knob gleamed like it had been polished yesterday. The girl ran straight for it. "Through!" Clara hesitated for half a breath, staring at the absurd doorframe standing alone in the open space. Then she heard it, the slow creak of shutters opening all around them. Dozens of windows revealed faceless heads leaning out, tilting in unison. Clara didn't wait. She sprinted through the doorframe, straight into pitch darkness, the sound of the between vanishing behind her like it had been cut with a knife. Clara stumbled forward, her hands outstretched, searching for walls that weren't there. The darkness here wasn't just absence of light. It was thick, clinging to her skin, muffling even the sound of her own breathing. Somewhere ahead, a single drop of water fell, echoing like a gunshot. Then another. She turned her head toward the sound, and the darkness shifted with her, parting just enough to reveal a faint gray glow far in the distance. It wasn't warm, like lantern light. This was cold, sterile, the kind of light found in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. The girl was gone. Clara's chest tightened. She called out once softly, "Hello?" But the sound was swallowed instantly, as though the air itself refused to carry it. With no other direction to follow, she began walking toward the glow. Her footsteps made no sound, and each time she glanced down, the ground seemed to ripple faintly, as if she were walking on something that wasn't quite solid. After what felt like minutes, or hours, she reached the source of the glow. It was a hallway. The walls were pale gray, smooth and unmarked, stretching forward into a gentle curve that hid whatever was beyond. The floor gleamed faintly, too clean, too new. She stepped onto it cautiously, the surface cool beneath her boots. A low hum began, subtle at first, then deepening, resonating through her ribs. Lights flickered on along the ceiling in sequence, stretching ahead of her, illuminating the hallway section by section. And at the very end, something stood waiting. It was human in shape, but taller. Its proportions stretched, its arms hanging a little too low, its neck too long. It didn't move, didn't tilt its head like the figure from the Winslow house, but she could feel it looking at her. The hum grew louder, and the lights behind her began to go out one by one. The thing at the far end started walking toward her. The steps were slow but deliberate, each one echoing faintly despite the floor's unnatural silence. Clara backed away instinctively, her gaze locked on the thing's movements. Its shoulders rolled unnaturally with each step, arms swinging just a fraction too far forward, as though the joints were on loose hinges. The lights continued to die behind her, pop, 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 leaving only the narrowing stretch of brightness between them. Her chest tightened as she realized she'd soon be standing in complete darkness with it. "Stop," she said, her voice shaking. It didn't. Her boot caught on the smooth floor, and she stumbled, hands slapping the cold surface to catch herself. The hum in the air deepened to a bone-vibrating pitch, making her teeth ache. The thing was closer now, close enough for her to see that its face wasn't quite a face at all. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they looked unfinished, as if someone had started to sculpt them from wet clay and stopped halfway. It opened its mouth. The hum stopped. The silence was immediate. Crushing. Clara's breath sounded too loud in her own ears. Then, from that half-formed mouth, came a whisper so faint she almost thought it was in her head. "Come back." The lights between them flickered violently, and for a split second it wasn't in front of her anymore. It was right beside her. Clara screamed and bolted forward, running toward the curve of the hallway. The lights ahead began flicking on faster, as if guiding her path, while those behind went dark in rapid succession. She rounded the curve and nearly crashed into a door. It was the only thing here, a plain metal door with no handle, no hinges, just a single keyhole in its center. The footsteps returned. She spun around, but the hallway behind her was pitch black now, the lights gone entirely. The hum had started again, low and patient, like it knew she wasn't going anywhere. A faint scrape sounded from the keyhole. Something inside it was moving. And then, slowly, the door began to open on its own. The seam of light that formed as the door opened wasn't white. It was the deep, sickly amber glow she had seen in the windows of the Winslow house underwater. The air that spilled through was warm, damp, and carried that same faintly sweet, rotting fruit smell. Clara's stomach knotted. The door opened wider and she saw only darkness beyond, but it wasn't empty. There was movement, slow, deliberate, the kind of shifting that suggested something vast was just beyond the threshold. The footsteps behind her grew louder. She didn't dare turn. Her eyes stayed locked on the opening as a shape emerged from the amber-lit dark. At first, it looked like a person, but as it stepped closer, its form stretched, warped, the legs too long, the arms jointless and fluid. Its face was smooth, but something writhed just beneath the surface, pushing outward in brief, awful shapes before sinking back again. It stopped in the doorway. The amber light pulsed once, twice, in time with her heartbeat. The thing tilted its head, and when it spoke, its voice was hers. "Clara, you're almost there." Her throat tightened. "Almost where?" she whispered. It smiled, wide, unnatural, splitting far past where a human mouth should end. "Home." From behind her, the unfinished-faced figure stepped into the fringe of amber light. Now they were both there, one in front, one behind, boxing her in. The hum swelled until she felt it deep in her bones. The amber-lit one extended a hand, long white fingers curling upward in invitation. She took a step back toward the unfinished-faced figure without meaning to, and its arm shot out, gripping her shoulder with a strength that locked her in place. The amber one stepped forward. Its touch was gentle, but the moment its fingers brushed her cheek, her vision went black. And when it returned, she was standing in the Winslow house foyer. Only now, every window and door looked out onto the swirling gray sky and the massive coiled shape that filled it. The thing in the sky shifted, its translucent skin stretching as something massive moved beneath it. The coils rotated slowly, impossibly large, blotting out what little light filtered through the gray. Clara's breath hitched as she realized every window in the Winslow house was open. No glass, no frames, just empty rectangles looking directly into that churning expanse above. And in each one, the creature's surface pressed closer, as if the house itself was being inspected from all sides. She stepped back from the nearest window, but the floor groaned under her weight, low, drawn out, like a warning. From somewhere deeper in the house came the dragging sound again. Slow, deliberate, heavy. The front door was gone. In its place was another hallway that hadn't been there before, narrow, stretching straight ahead, lined with closed doors. The air down it shimmered faintly, as though it were underwater. A faint tapping began at the far end. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was steady, patient. Clara turned toward the staircase, but the steps no longer led upward. Instead, they spiraled tightly downward into blackness. No banister, no railing, the descent looking far too steep for any human design. She glanced toward the kitchen, except there was no kitchen anymore. The doorway yawned open into the black void, the same she'd seen from the porch roof, stretching endlessly in every direction. The tapping stopped. A knock sounded on one of the doors in the hall. 3 times, slow and deliberate. The air in the foyer seemed to thicken, and from the windows the coiled thing outside pressed closer, its membrane dimpling inward as though something beneath it was about to break through. A faint whisper slipped into her ear, not from behind, not from ahead, but from everywhere at once. "Choose." The doors in the hallway rattled. The first one swung open. The open doorway gaped like a wound, its edges shivering as though the wood itself were breathing. Beyond it, Clara could see only a faint amber glow, the same sickly light that had bled through the strange metal door in the hallway before. Something moved in that glow, a silhouette, impossibly still except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. It stood just far enough inside that she couldn't see its face, only the outline of long limbs hanging loosely at its sides. The other doors along the hallway began to knock, one after another, in a sequence that rolled toward her like falling dominoes. Knock, 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 knock. The coiled thing outside shifted again. The Winslow house groaned in response, the walls bowing inward for a moment before snapping back. Dust rained from the ceiling in thin gray streams. Clara's breath quickened. The staircase downwards was still there, its spiral vanishing into black, but the pull toward the open doorway was stronger now, like a subtle current tugging at her skin. From inside that room came a new sound, a wet shuffle, like something dragging across the floor toward the threshold. The amber glow dimmed and brightened with each movement, pulsing in a slow, irregular rhythm. Her legs twitched, caught between fight and flight. She took one step backward toward the staircase, and every single door in the hallway flew open at once. From each one, figures emerged. Not the jerking, puppet-like movements of the faceless things she'd seen before, but slow, deliberate strides. They all turned toward her, heads tilting in perfect unison, mouths stretching open just enough to whisper her name. Clara. Behind her, the spiral stairs pulsed with faint light from far below, as though something was climbing toward her from the dark. She was boxed in. Hallway in front, stairs behind. The silhouette in the amber-lit room finally stepped into view. It was her. Clara froze, her pulse thudding in her ears. The figure standing in the amber glow was her in every detail. Same tangled hair, same torn coat, even the shallow cut on her cheek from when she'd gone through the porch window. But her double's eyes were wrong. They were too steady, too calm. "You're late," the other Clara said. Her voice was the same pitch and tone, but it had a strange depth to it, as if several voices were speaking in perfect harmony beneath the surface. The air in the hallway thickened. The faceless ones lining the doors took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under their collective weight. The spiral staircase behind her groaned as something heavy continued to ascend, each step making the wood shiver underfoot. "What are you?" Clara whispered. Her doubles smiled faintly. "I'm what you'll be when you stop running." She stepped forward, and the amber light followed her, spilling into the hallway and making the shadows around the faceless figures twitch and warp. "We've been patient." The pull toward her was stronger now, almost physical. Clara's boots slid forward a fraction without her willing them to. The spiral stairs behind her were brighter, and from the glow below came the faint outline of long, jointless limbs reaching upward. "I'm not you," Clara said, though her voice trembled. The other Clara tilted her head, mirroring the movement she'd seen in the first figure back at the house. "You will be." The walls groaned, the sound sharp and splintering, and the coiled thing outside pressed harder against the windows. The glassless frames bulged inward, their shapes distorting, as if the sky itself was trying to squeeze into the house. The other Clara raised a hand, palm out. "Come here." And without thinking, Clara took one step toward her. The floor under her boots pulsed faintly, each beat matching the rhythm of the other Clara's hand. The amber glow deepened, bleeding into the warped wallpaper, into the ceiling, even into the edges of the faceless ones standing in the hall. The closer Clara moved, the quieter the rest of the house became. The groaning walls, the scratching from the staircase below, the oppressive hum from outside, it all faded, replaced by a low, steady tone that seemed to hum directly inside her skull. Her double's expression softened into something almost warm. "See? You remember now. You've been here before." "I haven't," Clara said automatically, but the words felt unsteady, unconvincing, even to her. The other Clara took another step forward, and the amber glow spilled fully into the foyer. It was warmer now, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket, making her limbs feel slow and heavy. Her eyelids threatened to drop. A hand brushed her shoulder. She jerked and spun. One of the faceless figures had stepped close enough to touch her. Its smooth head leaned toward her ear, and though its mouth never moved, she heard it clearly. "Down." The word shattered the trance. Clara staggered back, breaking eye contact with her double. The warmth receded instantly, and the noises of the house roared back, scraping from the stairs, the windows buckling under pressure, the hallway knocking starting up again. Her double's face twisted, not in anger, but in something worse, disappointment. If you keep running, you'll make it worse. Clara's gaze darted to the spiral staircase, where pale fingers had begun to curl over the top step. Then to the windows, where the membrane of the sky creature quivered, as if seconds away from rupturing. "Choose," the other Clara said again, her voice overlapping with the whispers from every doorway. The hand on her shoulder tightened. The faceless one was still there, its head tilting toward the stairs, and from below something began to speak. The voice rising from the staircase wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It threaded through the air like smoke, curling into her ears, slipping past thought and settling somewhere deeper. "You've already been below." Clara's knees went weak. She didn't remember going below. Not really. But flashes hit her, earth pressing in on all sides, pale arms reaching from the walls, the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. The pale fingers on the top step tightened their grip, pulling more of the thing into view. Its head emerged next, smooth and featureless, turning as if it could still see her. The faceless one at her side leaned closer, its whisper brushing against her skin. "Home is down." Her double moved toward her, each step soundless despite the groaning floorboards. The amber light brightened until the rest of the hall and foyer were swallowed in shadow. "Don't listen to it," she said softly. "It only calls you to feed the house." The voice from the stairs grew sharper, each word like a blade. "She is not you. You are already me." The air between her and her double wavered, as if heat rose from the floor. Clara's head throbbed, the two voices colliding and folding over each other until she couldn't tell which belonged to who. The windows buckled again. This time, a pale bulge pressed through one frame, skin stretched thin, veins glowing faintly with that same amber light. The coiled thing outside was trying to force its way in. The knocking down the hall became pounding. Doors rattled violently, the faceless figures shifting in place, their smooth heads turning back and forth between her and the staircase, like they too were waiting for her choice. Her double extended a hand. The thing on the stairs extended one too, and in unison both voices said, "Come to me." The pull from both sides was suffocating. Clara's vision wavered, the amber glow from her double bleeding into the cold, depthless black rising from the staircase. It felt like the air itself had split in two, each half trying to drag her in opposite directions. The faceless figure at her shoulder began to tremble, its smooth head tilting farther and farther, until the neck bent at an impossible angle. Its grip on her tightened, not painfully, but with the insistence of something that would not let go unless it was torn apart. From the staircase, the pale figure stepped fully into view. It was taller now, impossibly so, its limbs stretching to fit the space. Though its face was still blank, Clara could feel its attention like a hand pressed against her chest. Her double moved closer, the amber light rippling outward with each step. "You've always been walking toward me," she said. "You just didn't know it." The pounding in the hallway grew violent, doors slamming open and shut in erratic bursts, shadows spilling from the frames and crawling along the walls like liquid. "Choose now," her double urged, voice soft but urgent. "If you wait any longer, it will choose for you." The pale figure on the stairs tilted its head, the motion slow, deliberate. When it spoke again, the sound was layered, dozens of voices folding into one. "You've already fallen. Let me finish it." The coiled thing outside the windows pressed harder. A crack like splitting wood echoed through the house, and from the broken seam in its membrane, something white and jointless began to push through. Her body acted before her mind caught up. She tore free from the faceless figure's grip and lunged, not toward the stairs, not toward her double, but toward the hallway. The pounding stopped instantly. Every door stood open. From within each room, a different version of herself stood waiting. They filled the doorways, dozens of Claras, each wearing the same torn coat, the same mud-caked boots. But their faces were wrong. Some had eyes that were too large, glassy and unblinking. Others had mouths that stretched far past their jaws, fixed in silent screams. A few were missing features entirely, smooth skin where eyes, nose, or mouth should have been. They didn't move at first. They just watched her, their bodies swaying slightly, like reeds in a slow current. Then one stepped forward. Its voice was hers, but thick, as though speaking through water. "We've been waiting for you." Another joined it. "You'll fit better here than anywhere else." The hallway seemed to narrow, shadows closing in behind them until the only way forward was through the versions of herself. The amber glow from her double at the foyer's edge faded, as though even she wouldn't follow Clara into this place. From behind, the pale figure on the stairs spoke again, its voice curling up the hall like smoke. "If you go in there, they will keep you." The Claras in the doorways moved as one now, each stepping forward in eerie sync. Their bare feet left wet prints on the warped boards, though Clara couldn't see where the water came from. One of them, its face split wide in a too-perfect grin, extended a hand toward her. "Come inside. We've been lonely." Her skin crawled, but her legs felt heavy, as though the hallway itself was pulling her deeper. The nearest room beyond the doorway was lit, but the light inside wasn't warm. It was the cold, sterile glow she'd seen in the endless hallway from before. Somewhere within that glow, she thought she saw movement. Not her, not these others, something larger. The versions of herself began to speak together, voices layering until they formed one sentence that shook the floorboards under her feet. "Step through and you will never have to choose again." The sentence echoed, each repetition duller and heavier, as though the walls themselves were absorbing it. Clara's chest tightened. The air felt syrup-thick, pressing down until she could barely draw a breath. The nearest Clara, the one with the too wide grin, kept her hand extended, her arm trembling slightly, not with weakness, but anticipation. Behind her, in the sterile lit room, the shadow she'd glimpsed moved again. This time it leaned forward, stretching impossibly tall, its head almost brushing the ceiling. The other Claras shifted aside in unison, creating a narrow, perfect path to the open doorway. From behind, the pale figure on the stairs growled, not in rage, but in warning. The sound was deep and wet, vibrating in her bones. "If you step inside, the door will close." The grinning Clara's eyes darted toward the stairwell, and her smile stretched even further, splitting until it almost touched her ears. "That's the point." The coiled thing outside pressed against the house again. This time, the impact was enough to make the windows buckle inward, the frames splintering. Thin, white filaments slid into the gaps, twitching as they searched for purchase. Clara's own voice, her real voice, spilled from the mouths of the others, a dozen variations overlapping until it became one solid plea. "Come in! Come in! Come in!" Her throat felt dry, her mind pulling in two directions, forward into that sterile light, or back toward the pale figure she feared almost as much. The floor shifted under her, the boards bending slightly as though something beneath was breathing. The path into the room seemed to stretch farther, the door growing taller and narrower until it looked more like a gash in the wall than an entrance. The figure in the room stepped closer to the doorway. It wasn't human. It wore her shape like a loose skin, the proportions all wrong. Arms too long, legs bending in ways they shouldn't. And when it smiled, every other Clara smiled with it. Behind her, the pale figure spoke again, quieter this time, but closer than it should have been. "Last chance." The pale figure's words clung to the air like frost, sinking into her skin. Clara didn't dare look back, afraid that if she saw how close it really was, her legs would lock and she'd never move again. The too wide grin of the nearest Clara twitched, as though struggling to hold its shape. The others behind her were perfectly still, their eyes locked on Clara with a devotion that felt more like hunger than recognition. In the sterile-lit room, the wrong-shaped version of her tilted its head. The motion was painfully slow, deliberate, like it was memorizing the sight of her before claiming it. The coiled thing outside struck the house again, this time with enough force to make the floor tilt. Clara stumbled, her boot catching on a warped board, and the Claras surged forward, one step in perfect unison, as though the stumble was the signal they'd been waiting for. She heard her own voice rise from them again, but this time it wasn't coaxing, it was commanding. "Come in." Her heart hammered. The doorway loomed taller now, the light inside shifting from sterile white to the deep amber she'd seen before. The change made the wrong-shaped Clara's skin ripple, like the light was feeding it. Behind her, the pale figure began to descend the hall. She could hear the wet drag of its hands along the walls, could feel the faint shift of air with each step. Her mind screamed for a third option, any escape that wasn't forward or back. But the house gave her none. The faceless figures in the side rooms leaned farther out, blocking the walls completely, their smooth heads almost brushing her shoulders. The wrong-shaped Clara extended an arm toward her. The skin of the hand sagged loosely over bone, the nails too dark, too thick. The pale figure was so close now she could feel its breath, slow, steady, impossibly cold, on the back of her neck. Both voices spoke at once, filling her skull until she thought her head would split. "Choose." The floor beneath her gave way. The board splintered with a deafening crack, and Clara dropped into darkness. For a moment there was no falling, only weightlessness, the sensation of being suspended in thick, cold air. Then gravity returned, yanking her down with brutal force. She landed hard on damp earth, the impact jarring up through her knees. The smell hit her next, wet soil, rust, and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the heat. Above, the jagged hole she'd fallen through was already closing. The edges of the wood curled inward, sealing over until there was no trace of an opening at all. She wasn't in the house anymore. Faint light glimmered ahead, revealing a narrow corridor carved into the earth. The walls were slick, dark, and glistening as though something had passed through them recently. Each slow drip from the ceiling landed with a sound too heavy to be water. She rose to her feet, her boots sinking slightly into the mud, and began moving toward the light. Every few steps, the ground trembled, not violently, but enough to make the walls shed clumps of wet dirt. The corridor widened into a chamber, and the light's source became clear. Dozens of candles, their flames perfectly still despite the heavy air. They sat atop stone pillars arranged in a circle, and in the center of that circle stood a door frame. It was identical to the freestanding one she'd seen in the between, blackened wood, polished brass knob, but this one was half buried in the earth, tilting slightly as if it had been pulled here from somewhere else. Through the open doorway there was no room, no hall, only a vast, swirling expanse of gray sky, and coiled within it, that thing. Its massive body shifted lazily, but its head, or the closest thing to one, was already angled toward the frame, as if aware of her. Even from here she felt its attention, a pressure that sank into her bones and slowed her pulse. Something moved in the shadows just beyond the candles. Long, pale fingers curled around the edge of the nearest pillar, followed by the slow emergence of a featureless head. Then another, and another. They were surrounding the circle. The nearest one leaned forward until its smooth face was inches from hers and whispered the same word she'd heard since the beginning. Down. The whisper rippled through the chamber, each faceless head around the circle tilting in unison as they echoed it. Down, down, down. The sound wasn't loud, but it burrowed under her skin, into her ribs, and seemed to vibrate in her spine. Clara took a step back, her heels sinking into the soft earth until she nearly lost her balance. The door frame in the center began to shift, not moving forward or back, but sinking. Slowly, the blackened wood descended into the ground, and the swirling gray sky on the other side tilted, pulling her gaze into it. Her pulse quickened. She couldn't tell if it was the illusion of perspective or something real, but the coiled thing in the sky seemed closer now, its translucent flesh pressed tighter against some unseen boundary. Beneath its skin, massive shapes writhed, human-sized, clawing faintly, their silhouettes distorted by the membrane. The circle of candles flickered for the first time. The flames bent inward, toward the door frame, as though drawn to whatever was below. The faceless ones stepped forward, the mud sucking at their bare feet. Their heads angled toward her, not the door, and the whisper shifted into something slower, more deliberate. You belong under. A pale hand brushed her arm, light as cobweb. The touch froze her blood. She yanked back, but the ground had softened, clutching her boots. The candles' flames bent harder toward the center, stretching unnaturally long, the wax dripping faster. From within the sinking doorway came a low, resonant hum, the same one she'd heard when the unfinished-faced thing first approached her in the hallway. Only now it was deeper, almost a vibration through the air, pulling at her chest in slow, steady waves. Her knees bent involuntarily. She was sinking. The faceless ones moved closer, their pale forms forming a wall around her. The nearest leaned in again, its mouth opening wide enough to split its skin. And from that dark maw came her own voice. "Clara, let's go home." The sound of her own voice coming from that gaping, skin-splitting mouth rooted her in place. It wasn't just mimicry. It carried her tone, her cadence, even the subtle hitch she got when speaking through fear. "Stop," she whispered, but it came out thin, almost swallowed by the hum deepening from the doorframe. The faceless one didn't move away. It bent closer, its breath damp and cold against her cheek. "We've been here so long," it said in her voice. "Don't make us stay any longer." The others around the circle began to sway, not side to side, but forward, inch by inch, as though their bodies were being drawn toward her. The earth beneath her feet softened further, the mud sucking greedily at her boots until she could feel it climbing over the soles. The doorframe had sunk halfway into the ground now, and the sky within it churned faster. The coiled thing pressed closer to the boundary, the outlines beneath its skin moving frantically, their forms clearer now, faces distorted in terror, hands pressed against the membrane from the inside. A sudden sharp pop cracked through the chamber. One of the candles had burst, its glass holder shattering outward. The wax splatter steamed where it hit the wet earth. The hum rose in pitch, vibrating in her teeth. Her knees buckled and her hands shot out instinctively to steady herself. The faceless ones reacted instantly, cold, slick fingers clasping her wrists. She struggled, but their grip was patient, steady, unyielding. Behind them, a shadow began to rise from the mud beyond the candle circle, slow at first, then faster. The shape was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs stretching far too long. It moved without bending, simply emerging, as if the earth itself was pushing it upward. The faceless one, still inches from her face, spoke again, but this time the voice wasn't hers. It was that deep, layered growl she'd heard in the hallway. "It's already decided." And with a sudden collective shove, they pushed her toward the sinking doorway. Clara's boots skidded through the mud, the wet earth clutching at her heels as the faceless ones drove her forward. The candlelight flared in one synchronized pulse, shadows snapping long and sharp across the chamber walls. She twisted against their grip, but their hands were like iron, cold and slick, as though carved from wet stone. Each shove brought her closer to the door frame, which now stood barely chest height above the ground. The gray sky beyond churned violently, the coiled thing pressing so close she could see the thin seams between its overlapping segments. Something inside that vast, translucent body moved in a way that made her stomach turn, like the twitch of an insect's legs magnified 1,000 times. The hum from the doorway became a low roar, not in volume but in weight, pressing against her skull until her vision blurred at the edges. When she tried to plant her feet, the mud simply swallowed deeper, rising past her ankles, thick and warm now, almost clinging in a way that felt alive. One faceless figure leaned so close that its featureless face nearly touched hers, its head tilted, the motion stiff, almost mechanical. In a voice that was neither hers nor the growl from before, it whispered, "Once you see it from the other side, you will understand." The words sank into her like a hook. A sudden movement beyond the candles caught her eye. The tall, impossibly thin shadow was fully upright now. Its body didn't end at the ceiling. It seemed to continue past sight, disappearing into darkness that shouldn't exist down here. And then it bent, its entire height folding down at once until its head was level with hers. It had no face, but something beneath the smooth surface shifted, slow and deliberate, pressing out as if something behind the skin was trying to look at her. The faceless ones shoved again, harder. Her knees hit the mud with a wet slap, her hands sinking deep. The roar in her head was deafening now. She realized too late that it wasn't sound, it was breathing, coming from the other side of the door frame. The breath rolled over her in slow tidal waves, damp, cold, and reeking of brine and iron. It was too vast to belong to anything human. Each exhale seemed to pull the air from the chamber, and each inhale dragged the wet earth higher around her legs, as though the ground itself was obeying. The faceless ones didn't speak now. They only held her still, their pale arms locking across her shoulders, their hands pressing against her spine. The candles hissed and guttered, not from wind, but from the steady rhythm of that impossible breathing. Beyond the doorframe, the coiled thing began to unspool. Its movements were deliberate, a slow unraveling that revealed more of its glistening surface with every loop that slid past the boundary. The membrane shimmered faintly in the gray light, and within it, the trapped shapes moved more frantically, faces distorting against the thin barrier, fingers clawing for something that would never come. One face caught her eye. It was hers. Not the fractured reflection from the house, not the too wide grin or wrong-shaped imitation. Her. The expression was raw panic, the mouth opening and closing in silent screams as the membrane dragged her backward into the coils. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The tall, thin figure looming above her leaned closer, the smooth surface where its face should be pressed forward until it touched hers. The sensation was cold and rubbery, yet somehow she felt it watching her from behind that blank skin. When it spoke, the voice came from inside her own head, bypassing her ears entirely. "Step through. You are already there." The faceless ones began to pull her upright, their movements oddly gentle now, as though they feared breaking her. The mud clung desperately to her legs but gave way under their insistence. The doorframe had sunk to waist height. The swirling sky beyond it had darkened, shot through with jagged lines of black. The coils pressed closer, now only an arm's reach away. From within the membrane, her other self pressed one hand to the inside of the frame, eyes locked on Clara's. Her mouth moved. One word. "Down." The word hit her like a drop into still water. small but sending shockwaves through everything around her. The faceless ones froze mid-motion, their pale hands still gripping her arms. Even the tall, thin figure above her seemed to pause, its blank surface flattening as though listening. Her other self inside the membrane pressed harder against the unseen barrier, palm blade wide, mouth moving again. This time Clara heard it, not through her ears but through her bones. Down, now. The mud beneath her feet pulsed. It wasn't an illusion. It beat, a slow rhythmic throb like a buried heart. Each pulse softened the earth further, sucking her deeper until she was knee-deep again. The coils of the thing beyond the frame shifted, its vast length moving with sudden interest. It bent toward her, pressing so close that the membrane trembled under its weight. And then, something inside it moved toward her. Not one of the screaming silhouettes, not a trapped version of herself. Something else. It was small, fast, and it was coming directly for the frame. The tall figure straightened abruptly, its head tilting toward the approaching shape. The faceless ones released her at once, stepping back in a slow, coordinated retreat that made the candle flames bow toward her as they passed. Her other self slammed both hands against the membrane now, shouting silently. Clara's gut churned. That wasn't a warning anymore, it was desperation. The small thing inside the coils struck the inside of the membrane, and for the first time Clara heard the sound it made. A crack. Hairline fractures raced outward across the translucent skin, fine as spider webs, each one glowing faintly from within. The hum was gone. In its place came a slow, tearing sound, wet and fibrous, as the cracks began to spread. Her other self turned her head sharply to look at something above Clara, and her face twisted into an expression Clara had never seen on herself before. Pure dread. The tall figure was bending again, but now it was smiling. The smile wasn't made of lips or teeth. It was a slow splitting of the blank surface, peeling open from nowhere. Inside was not a mouth but a void, pure and depthless, darker than the gaps between stars. The tearing sound from beyond the frame grew louder. The membrane bulged inward, straining against the fractures, each glow pulse inside it sinking with the beat of the earth beneath her feet. The small thing moved again, slamming itself against the cracks, widening them with each impact. Her other self was still pressed to the inside, but now her hands were pulling at the edges of the cracks, as if she could stop them from widening. Clara didn't understand. Why fight to keep it closed? The tall figure's smile stretched wider, bending impossibly far across where a face should have been. The faceless ones had all retreated to the edges of the chamber now, standing just beyond the candle circle, their bodies utterly still, as though watching for the moment to move again. Clara's boots sank another inch into the mud. She tried to step back, but the earth clung harder, almost suctioning her in place. The beating beneath her feet was faster now, the chamber trembling with it. A sudden snap. The membrane split just enough for a narrow black slit to appear. The breath that escaped was no longer cold. It was hot, damp, and stank of copper and decay. The candles flickered violently, some extinguishing entirely, plunging half the chamber into shadow. From the slit, something emerged. Not a hand, not a claw. An eye. It was huge, perfectly round and colorless, except for the faint glimmer of movement deep within. Its gaze locked onto her instantly, and she felt her chest tighten as though her ribs were being pulled inward. Her other self screamed, no sound, just the terrible wrench of her face, and slammed her entire body against the membrane to block it. The tall figure straightened, its void smile trembling like it was laughing. And then it spoke, the voice a layered chorus that came from everywhere at once. "It's here." The eye didn't blink. It couldn't. It only swiveled slowly, its entire surface twitching as if straining to focus harder on her. Deep within that pale expanse, shadowy shapes shifted like fish beneath ice, darting and vanishing before she could understand their form. Her other self clawed at the cracks around it, her fingers tearing against the slick membrane. Black fluid leaked from the splits, running down her arms and dripping into the mud below. The tall figure began to move around the candle circle. It didn't step, it glided, impossibly tall limbs stretching with each pass like lengths of wire unspooling. Its smile stayed fixed, the void behind it shimmering faintly now, as though something inside was pressing forward. The mud around Clara's legs pulsed again, faster, insistent, almost matching the erratic beat of her heart. It wasn't just sucking her down anymore, it was pulling her toward the frame. The faceless ones swayed as they watched, their blank heads tilting in perfect unison. Then, without a word, they began to hum, not the deep, oppressive drone she'd heard before, but something higher, almost a tremor in the air. The sound made the candle flames bend toward her, their tips stretching unnaturally long. The eye pressed harder into the split membrane, its surface distorted, bulging outward until she could see fine lines along it, vein-like cracks etched in a perfect radial pattern. Her other self turned her head toward Clara, face pale and streaked with the black fluid, and mouthed something. It took Clara a moment to understand. Run. The word sent a cold spike down her spine. She yanked her legs upward, but the mud clung harder, thick and unyielding. The pull from beneath was stronger than before, calculated, as if whatever beat inside the ground had her rhythm memorized. The tall figure stopped gliding. It stood perfectly still, head bent just enough for the void smile to angle directly at her. And then the hum from the faceless ones shifted, becoming words. Down, down, down. The cracks in the membrane split wider. The eye began to push through. The membrane tore with a wet, fibrous sound, and the eye slid halfway through, its surface glistening under the weak candlelight. It was larger than she'd realized, far larger than her head, and its movement was deliberate, the way a predator eased itself through a narrow opening. As it emerged, the temperature in the chamber shifted violently. The air went dry, the mud around her legs warming until it felt almost feverish. Each pulse beneath her feet now carried a faint thud, as though something massive was climbing upward from far below. Her other self fought harder, but every strike against the membrane only seemed to hasten its unraveling. The black fluid poured freely now, pooling in the mud, where it was instantly absorbed. The chamber floor shuddered as if in response, a ripple moving outward through the earth. The tall figure began to lower itself again, the void smile stretching wider, wider, until it curved nearly to the back of where its head should have been. From that impossible blackness, a faint light flickered, dim and sickly like a candle drowning underwater. The faceless one's chant deepened. The single word, down, rolled through the chamber in a rhythm that matched the heartbeat in the mud. Their bodies rocked forward and back in unison, every motion pulling Clara's gaze toward the sinking frame. The eye's focus sharpened. It was no longer searching. It had her. She felt it press into her mind without touching her, an invisible weight settling behind her eyes. There were no words, only a sense of recognition and hunger. The mud gave another heaving pull, dragging her an inch closer to the frame. Her knees buckled and she caught herself with her hands, which sank instantly up to the wrists. From the membrane's interior, more shapes began to stir. Not faces, not reflections. These were long and thin, bending at too many joints, unfurling like strands of wet rope. They moved toward the tear, their tips quivering in anticipation. Her other self turned suddenly, not toward the eye, but toward Clara, and screamed without sound, shoving her arm through the split to point sharply away from the frame. The tall figure's head whipped toward that gesture. Its smile vanished. The absence of the smile was somehow worse. Where that impossible curve had been, the surface went perfectly smooth again, featureless, unreadable. The tall figure straightened to its full height, a thin shiver running through its elongated frame, like tension tightening a wire. The eye stilled in the tear, its surface twitching in tiny spasms. The long, jointed shapes behind it hesitated, curling back slightly as if awaiting some silent command. Clara's other self kept pointing, her arm trembling from the strain of pushing it through the narrowing gap. The black fluid streamed from her sleeve, dripping to the chamber floor in heavy, deliberate drops that hissed when they hit the mud. The faceless one's chant faltered. Their synchronized rocking slowed, their heads twitching toward one another in sharp, jerking motions like insects unsure which way to turn. Clara's lungs burned. Every instinct screamed at her to move, run, dig, fight, but her body felt half numb, the pull from the mud almost hypnotic now. The tall figure tilted its head toward her other self's arm. Slowly it began to glide, not toward Clara, but toward her. The motion was silent, its towering body weaving through the candle circle without disturbing the flames. Her other self's face twisted into something between fury and despair. She shoved her arm deeper, fingers curling as if to grasp something invisible. The mud under Clara rippled again, outward this time, away from her feet, toward the wall directly behind her. For a moment, the heartbeat beneath her stopped. The sudden stillness made the air feel thin, brittle, and then the wall cracked. It wasn't stone, not anymore. The fissure split wide, revealing a narrow gap lit by a faint green glow, the light shifting as though underwater. The smell that rushed out was sharp and cold, cutting through the chamber's heavy dampness. Her other self's eyes locked on Clara's. Her mouth formed two clear words. "Go now." The tall figure froze mid-step. Its head snapped toward the new gap in the wall, that smooth surface twitching faintly, like something beneath it was trying to push through. The eye in the frame began to thrash. The thrashing sent ripples through the membrane, each violent shudder widening the tear and spraying that black, glistening fluid across the mud. The long, jointed limbs behind it pushed forward again, now writhing impatiently. The gap in the wall pulsed with its faint green light, casting jagged shadows across the chamber. The cold air spilling from it felt alive, brushing her skin like fingers, urging her closer. Her other self's arm strained farther through the tear, palm open toward Clara, pulling her toward the gap, not the frame. The tall figure's body began to bend backward, spine arching until it looked like it might snap. From the smooth surface where its face should have been, the faint shimmer intensified, forming a trembling vertical line. It was opening again. The faceless ones broke from their stillness. They moved in a sudden, coordinated surge, not toward Clara, but toward the wall. Their hands clawed at the mud, dragging themselves with unnatural speed, leaving long furrows in their wake. Their chant was gone. Now they emitted a low, vibrating hiss that seemed to rattle her teeth. The eye fixed on her with such force she could barely breathe. Images bled into her vision, cold water closing over her head, narrow tunnels lit by that same green glow, a darkness moving just out of sight. It wasn't showing her escape. It was showing her where it would take her. The mud's pull returned, stronger than ever, dragging her toward the frame. Her knees scraped against the ground as she fought, fingers clawing for purchase in the slick earth. Her other self let out a soundless scream and shoved her entire head through the tear. For the briefest moment, Clara was staring into her own eyes, not distorted, not monstrous, just hers, wild with urgency. The wall's fissure flared brighter, the cold wind turned sharp, slicing at her skin. Something thin and wet looped around her ankle. One of the limbs had reached her. The pressure was gentle at first, then tightened until pain shot up her leg. Her other self's expression snapped from fear to rage. She wrenched her head back through the tear, vanishing into the membrane, and a second later the limb on Clara's ankle jerked violently, not pulling her in, pulling her away. The sudden force ripped her free from the mud's suction with a wet, sucking pop. Clara hit the ground hard, skidding on her side toward the fissure in the wall. The grip around her ankle didn't loosen. It dragged her faster through the slick muck, past candles that toppled and hissed out in the churned earth. The tall figure twisted to follow, its long limbs stretching unnaturally, scraping against the ground as it lunged. The void slit in its face had opened fully now, the faint underwater light inside flaring as though something within was straining to reach her. The faceless ones reached the fissure first, clawing at its edges as if trying to pry it shut. Their bodies pressed into the crack, smearing the green light until it bent around them in thin, distorted streaks. Her other self emerged from the membrane again, half her body pushing through, black fluid streaming down her side. This time she was holding something. It looked like a length of rope, but it pulsed faintly, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Without hesitation, she swung it toward the tall figure. The rope cracked against the chamber floor, and where it struck, the mud caved inward, hissing as if burned. The tall figure froze mid-motion, its limbs twitching in place. The limb around Clara's ankle tightened once more and hauled her directly toward the fissure. The faceless ones hissed louder, scrambling over one another to block it. But the limb didn't slow. It whipped her in a wide arc, her shoulder clipping one of the candles, and slammed her into the narrow gap. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. The cold from the fissure poured into her lungs like ice water, flooding her with a dizzy clarity. She realized she was no longer being pulled. She was being pushed. Her other self was almost entirely through the tear now, eyes locked on Clara, mouthing something she couldn't hear. Behind her, the tall figure began to move again, its limbs blurring in a sickening, inhuman sprint. Clara didn't think. She shoved herself through the fissure just as the void smile lunged forward. And the world folded around her. There was no sensation of crawling through a narrow space. One moment she was in the chamber, the next she was plunging headfirst into freezing black water. The cold was so complete it stole her breath before she could gasp. She kicked instinctively, but the water was thick, almost gelatinous. A faint green light shimmered far below her, the same as in the fissure, rippling like it was being seen through layers of glass. Something moved in front of it, long, slow, and impossibly wide, its edges melting into the dark. Her ankle throbbed where the limb had gripped her, the pain sharp enough to anchor her mind against the panic. She twisted in the water, expecting to see the fissure behind her, but there was only more black, stretching endlessly in every direction. Then, movement. A pale figure descending toward her, hair streaming like smoke in the water. Her other self. Clara reached out and the figure's hand closed firmly around hers. The touch was startlingly warm. For the first time, the other self's mouth moved in a way that carried sound, though it was muffled by the water. "Don't stop moving." Shapes began to flicker in the distance, thin, writhing outlines that moved with startling bursts of speed. They swam in arcs around her, closing the gap in tight spirals. Their eyes glowed faintly, not green, but a dull, molten orange that bled into the water. Her other self yanked her downward, toward the faint green glow at the bottom. The water thickened the deeper they went, pressing on her ears and chest, each stroke an act of will. The glow resolved into what looked like a doorway, arched, framed by stone, its center shifting like liquid glass. A sound rolled through the water, so deep she felt it more than heard it. Behind them, one of the orange-eyed shapes darted closer, its outline swelling, stretching into something too big for the space it occupied. The pressure in the water changed. It wasn't just thick anymore. It was pulling upward. Her other self gripped her hand tighter, forcing her toward the doorway. "Don't look back." Clara didn't want to, but the pull from above was so strong, it felt like invisible fingers hooked through her ribs. Her body twisted despite her, and for a fraction of a second she saw what was behind them. It wasn't one of the orange-eyed shapes. It was the tall figure. But here in the water it was different. Its body stretched impossibly far into the darkness above, disappearing into the black as though it had no true end. The void where its face should have been glowed faintly, the light pulsing in rhythm with the drag pulling her upward. From that glow, thin tendrils of light leaked out, reaching down for her like searching vines. The moment her gaze locked on it, the upward pull doubled. Her legs kicked wildly, but the water clung to her, trying to turn her toward that light. Her other self let out a muffled sound, sharp, angry, and slammed her palm against Clara's chest. The push sent Clara tumbling downward, the doorway's green light swelling in her vision. The stone arch became clearer now, etched with strange spiraling carvings that seemed to writhe as she passed. The surface inside it rippled, brighter and more violent than before, like something on the other side was struggling to hold it open. The orange-eyed shapes scattered as they neared, their outlines collapsing into streaks of shadow that darted away into the black. The pull from above weakened, though it didn't vanish entirely. It still tugged at her hair, her hands, the fabric of her clothes. Her other self reached the doorway first, spinning in the water to face her. She mouthed something Clara couldn't fully understand, but it looked like two words, "Not yet." Then she dove through the green light and was gone. The pull from above surged again, stronger than before, as though it had realized what was happening. Clara's fingers brushed the edge of the stone arch. The carvings writhed faster now, some curling around her wrist as if urging her inside. She didn't think. She shoved herself forward, and something caught her hair. The pain was immediate and blinding, a sharp yank that stopped her mid-dive. Her head snapped back, bubbles exploding from her mouth as she kicked wildly. The water behind her boiled with motion. A pale, jointed limb snaked through the dark, its surface glistening like wet porcelain. It was wrapped tightly around a fistful of her hair, pulling with a patience that was somehow worse than brute force. The doorway's green light flared, spilling across her face, casting the limb's details in sharp relief. It wasn't smooth at all. It was covered in rows of fine, hooked barbs, each one angled to dig deeper the more she resisted. Her other self reappeared, bursting through the doorway in a rush of bubbles. Her eyes locked on Clara's hair, and her expression hardened. She reached to her side and pulled something from the folds of her soaked clothes, something small, sharp, and dark as obsidian. In one swift motion, she pressed it to Clara's head. The barbs tore free in a single, searing rip. Clara felt strands of her hair float past her face in the water, followed by a warm bloom that wasn't the cold green light. It was blood. The limb recoiled, curling away into the darkness. But even as it vanished, the pull from above surged again, stronger, like a final desperate grasp. The tall figure's glow flared blindingly far overhead, and for a moment she swore she heard it. Not in her ears, but inside her head. Stay. Her other self shoved her toward the doorway with such force it knocked the thought clean away. Clara tumbled forward, her body breaking the surface of the green light. And the water was gone. She hit solid ground on her hands and knees, gasping, the cold still clinging to her skin. The air here was heavy but dry, smelling faintly of dust and burnt metal. When she looked up, she wasn't in a chamber. She was standing in a vast, empty street. The street stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with buildings that leaned inward like they were eavesdropping on her arrival. Their windows were tall and narrow, but no light shone from within, only the faint reflection of the same green glow that bled from somewhere far down the road. The ground beneath her hands was paved in black stone, each slab etched with shallow grooves that formed looping, repeating patterns. When she shifted her weight, she realized they weren't carved. They were worn, as though countless feet had traced the same paths over and over until the marks sank deep. Behind her, the doorway shimmered faintly in the air, its stone arch standing alone in the middle of the street. No wall, no building, just the freestanding frame, and through it, the watery dark they'd just escaped. Her other self stood beside it, dripping steadily onto the stone, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin. For the first time, she seemed smaller. The fierceness in her posture had eased, replaced by something heavier, something like exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," she said, and her voice, unfiltered by water or mud, was identical to Clara's own. Clara staggered to her feet, chest still heaving. "Then why pull me through?" Her other self's gaze shifted down the street toward that distant throbbing green glow. "Because it was closer than what was behind you." The words settled between them like stones, and the silence that followed made the street feel even emptier. Somewhere far away, a single metallic clang echoed, followed by a slow, dragging sound that grew fainter, then stopped entirely. Clara took a step toward the glow. The moment her foot touched the groove in the next stone, a low vibration ran through the ground beneath her, as though the city had noticed her movement. Her other self's voice sharpened. "Stay in the center of the street. Don't touch the shadows." Clara looked down. There were no shadows, only the suggestion of them. Places where the air shimmered faintly, as if it were thicker there, waiting for something to pass through. Somewhere behind one of the leaning buildings, something took a breath,